Today we are continuing our comparative exploration of the two books, one for Islam, the Koran, and one for the Christian faith, the Bible, with a view to understanding the differences better. Now, we know that in the Bible, God explains that man has fallen short of his glory. We have all sinned because we are the descendants of Adam and Eve that disobeyed God in the beginning, shortly after their creation, and they were expelled from the garden, and they had to live and try to continue life without God. Then God revealed himself through mankind by different prophets. He taught them how to approach him with sacrifice and with commands that would help us live a better life. But these 615 and 13 commandments couldn't be obeyed. It was just impossible, because if you miss one, you miss the whole. And so Jesus had to come down, take human flesh, live on this earth, and die for our sake. So to reverse the trend, as just from one man sin came into the world, then from another man, Jesus Christ, sin was removed, and we found our way back to God. And so Jesus brought salvation that was needed because we were sinful. Now the Quran that came 7 centuries after that says otherwise. Mohammed was born in 569, so towards the end of the 6th century. And the Quran in Surah 1 just talk about God saying, lead us to the right path. And then immediately Surah 2 says that the book, that is the Quran, is the guide of the faithful who believe in the ununderstandable, make the prayer, and give gifts, alms to the poor. So we see that if you read the Quran, you see that the Quran doesn't talk about sin, original sin or otherwise. All it says is that you have to obey Allah's commands. You have to pray, and the prayer is talking about is the recitation of the Quran, verbatim. You learn it by heart in Arabic, and you repeat it. And then giving to the poor, and reciting daily the fact that God is one, and that you believe in his prophet Mohammed. And then you have to go to the Mecca once in your lifetime at least, or more if you can. So there are 5 pillars of Islam, and that is what you are supposed to do. And if you do that, the Quran says maybe you will make it to paradise. So it's a very different approach. For the Bible, we have to recognize, first of all, that we are sinners, that we cannot make it, that it's impossible to obey all the commands and approach a God that is very holy. And so we come through Jesus Christ. We accept him as Lord of our lives, and through his sacrifice we have now opened door to God. And in him, by faith, we enter God's family. And in the Quran, there is no family of God. God is just very far, unknowable, and he has no revealer. Prophet Muhammad is just his ultimate prophet, the one that is giving out his commands. And he's not even someone that you can copy, as we are going to see later. So the issue of salvation is not there in the Quran. You don't need to be saved for the Quran. You're already in the faithful by the fact that you are born a Muslim. And if you're a Muslim, everything is okay for you. And it is recognized that these people are no holy. They are not. Another thing is, as we have seen already, that the God of the Koran is just one. The God of the Bible, Jehovah, is Trinity. That's 3 persons in one God. Now the second person, the first person of the Trinity is God the Father. Allah, the God of the Quran, is not a father. It's just God. And all you have to do is to submit. Islam means submission. You have to submit to him. He's not a father. He has no family. The God of the Bible is the father of a family. The second person of the Trinity for the Christians is Jesus Christ. Now Jesus, Isa, is mentioned in the Quran. But in the Quran, Isa, Jesus, is only a prophet. And so and then that prophet came to reveal Allah, just like the other prophets before him. He's mentioned in a list from Noah to Moses to others, and culminating with the last one, that is Mohammed. And Jesus, for the Muslims, was not crucified. Somebody was crucified in his place to give the impression that he was crucified, but they don't believe that he was crucified. So obviously, he didn't get resurrected. They still believe that Jesus will come back, just like the Christians, but the difference is, for the Christians, he's the Messiah. For the Muslims, he's just a prophet that will come back to bring everybody back to Muhammad and Allah. The Holy Spirit is very important in the Christian faith. He's the one that Jesus sent to guide us after he left the earth. He said to his disciples, I will not leave you orphans. I will send the Holy Spirit that will be in you, and he will guide you into all truth, and he will remind you of all I taught you. Now that chapter 14 of the Gospel of John is misused, is misinterpreted by the Muslims in the way that he says that all that Jesus talks about as Holy Spirit, the Muslims understand it as being Jesus Christ, being Muhammad, which you can see that is impossible, because Jesus said, stay in Jerusalem until you are filled by the Holy Spirit. But Muhammad didn't come to Jerusalem within that time. He only came 7 centuries after that. And he was not sent to the disciples. By that time, all these disciples had died. So all we know is that in Acts chapter 2 in the Bible is described the Holy Spirit coming down and filling the disciples. That event that is described as the Pentecost. That's the beginning of the Christian church. And obviously, when Jesus said the Holy Spirit, he cannot describe a human being. And the Holy Spirit will be in you. Muhammad cannot be in the believers because he's a human being like them. So we see that chapter 14 that describes the Holy Spirit for the first very detailed time doesn't and is describe Muhammad at all. Another thing we have to understand is what is heaven and hell. we know that Jesus described two ways after death. You have either heaven or death or hell. And we know how hell is described. In the Koran, there is also heaven and hell, but they are very different. In the Bible, heaven is not about a place as such. It is the presence of God. Being in heaven is being in the permanent, eternal presence of God. In the Quran, heaven is repeatedly described in many, many verses of surahs as a place of gardens with fruits, a lot of fruits. And it's also a place of permanent leisure. And it's also a place for men, really, because it's describing that they would have 70 huris, that's virgins, that will be permanently at their service, and that they will have sex with them. They will be always virgins. Even if they have been penetrated, they are still virgins. And they are beautiful, and they are described in great beauty. And clearly that differs completely from heaven as described in the Bible, because Jesus Christ said clearly that in heaven there is no man and wife. So he told us, there was a story that he was asked about somebody that had several husbands, one after the other, because they died repeatedly. Now, he said, once you are in heaven, you are not the wife or the husband to somebody, because we shall be all like angels. So there will be, the sexual life is only limited to this earth, because it's a shadow of the love of God for his church. But for the Quran, sex is very important, both here on earth and in heaven. And that also casts a doubt about what happens to the women when they go to heaven, if they go to heaven, because that presence of virgins is clearly for men. So we don't know. Another thing we have to mention is that there is no need for salvation for the Quran, because people have not been described as sinners. Once you are a Muslim, you are in. But being in on earth doesn't guarantee that you will be in heaven, because repeatedly the Quran says maybe if you, after obeying all the commands, maybe you will make it to heaven. So there is no guarantee. Another last thing we want to talk about in this portion is what the Quran does with the Bible. The Quran has gathered most of the Old Testament, rehashed it to present it as like phase one of his story. It's like the Quran was phase two of the Old Testament. With the difference is that for the Quran, everybody from Adam is a Muslim, which is impossible because Islam didn't exist before Mohammed. There was no mention anywhere, both in the Bible or anywhere else, of Islam before Mohammed. And so, if he says that all these people, Adam and so on, were Muslims, that they were not Christians, that they were not Jews, they were all Muslims, that Moses was a Muslim, everybody was a Muslim, and that explains why if somebody leaves Islam, is considered as an apostate. But the Christians also are presented as apostates, because if you believe that everybody was Muslim, then if you say you are not, then it means you have left that. But this has no tangible basis in any archive in the world. Next, we are going to consider other matters.